It's the most inclusive money that has ever existed, but it's worth 9 times less than the thing that it's supposedly competing for. All right, so Bitcoiners, I'm sure you've heard on Twitter, right? Either an advertisement for a centralized exchange, or you've heard sailors say it, you heard other people say it. Bitcoin is better than gold. Why is Bitcoin better than gold? Bitcoin's better than gold because it's easier to transport over long distances. Compare that with a piece of gold, right? Gold's very heavy. So it's not a problem if you have, a couple $100 worth of physical gold. That's not an issue, right? But try doing $1 million. Try doing $2 million, right? Then that gold starts to become very heavy. Gold is actually a very heavy metal. And not only that, because it's so heavy, what happens is that the storage of it, right, happens to end up in centralized institutions. And because it's in centralized institutions, it actually makes it easier for governments to capture. And that's what I'm going to talk about a little bit today. The deficiencies of gold, why Bitcoin is better, a couple examples of it, and then a history of governments, the US government, many governments actually seizing gold whenever they get into trouble, whenever they want to fund a war. So you, the deplorable, the pleb, you get to foot the bill. And what they give you in return is a shitcoin, also known as fiat, as paper money, right? So they take your gold, right? Your sound money that they can't create. Remember what I told you about earlier. If you want to create more gold, what do you have to do? You have to get in line like everybody else, and you got to get that stuff out of the ground, or you have to buy it from somebody else. But fiat, very different. All you have to do is print it. That's very little for governments. And now in the digital age, it's just numbers on a computer. So anyways, let's check it out. I thought you guys would find this interesting, and here we go. And by the way, this is why I believe Bitcoin's gonna win. And the world hasn't woken up to this. I fundamentally believe that when the world wakes up to the inferiority, how do you say that, Phil? I can't pronounce it. Inferiority of gold versus Bitcoin. I think this is gonna push Bitcoin into the hundreds of thousands, if not millions, easily, right? Just the world hasn't woken up to this yet. Anyways, let's check it out. It's funny because Austrian School of Economics, anyways, a plan conceived by the Austrian Central Bank in 2015 to move 50 tons of their monetary gold from London to Switzerland has not been realized 7 years later. Since 2007, the Austrian Central Bank owns a few kilograms short of 280 tons of gold. In a report released by the Austrian Court of Audits from February 2015, it stated that Austria was holding too much of its metal in London at the Bank of England. The Court of Audits concluded that all contracts between OENB and its external depositories, but mainly the one in England, contained deficiencies and auditing measures were lacking. Now, couple things here, right? Austria is custodying their gold with another foreign country. That gives that foreign country a tremendous amount of leverage, which I'll get to in a second. But the other component, right, is auditing. How do you know that all those gold bars are really 99% gold? You know how you do that with Bitcoin? You run a Bitcoin node. Costs $200-300. In fact, if you get yourself a nodle, it's already built for you, and it's made of fucking metal. It's badass. You could go to the link down below, nodle.eu. It's awesome. Anyways, soon after, the Austrian Central Bank announced a new storage concept. Contracts with external depositories would be reviewed and amended. 90 tons stored at BOE would be repatriated, and 50 tons would be transferred from London to Switzerland within 5 years. The new storage concept should have been completed, but it wasn't. And let's talk a little bit about why it wasn't. You know how much 50 tons is? you need a semi-truck guarded with armed guards to make sure the gold gets from point A to point B, just to move that store of value. So you realize its limitations. Now, I was talking about how Austria was outsourcing the storage of its gold. Now, what are the problems of this? Do you guys remember this? UK court overturns ruling on 1.8 billion of Venezuelan gold. And we talked about this when this came out. Now, listen, I'm Venezuelan. I don't like the Maduro government, okay? But do you know how crazy this sounds? The UK is getting to dictate what another country can and cannot do with its gold, and Venezuela had to sue the UK in order to get rights on its gold. So whose gold really is it? Definitely not Venezuela. It sounds like it's the UK, and they have an IOU to Venezuela that they'll pay whether if it's politically favorable or not. This is the problem. This is why we advocate so strongly for self-custody. So 2 things here that I want you to get from this article, right? Outsourcing the storage of wealth, right? Because it's heavy, right? You also want to secure it. right? Another thing is the auditing of it, right? How do you audit? How do you audit that gold is really gold? How do you audit that it's really there? With Bitcoin, you could audit it in the second, on the fly, on your phone. You don't need a special detector, weights, or any of that stuff. Now, let's talk about the other limitations of gold, right? So what happens usually is citizens buy gold as a store of value, right? Especially when the economy's in turmoil and people flee. But the problem is, right, is that if you start to store a lot of it, you don't trust your own custody, right? Why would you? Are you going to build a vault at your house, right? Are you going to build a safe at your house? Okay, a safe is reasonable, but if you have a couple $1 million worth of gold, it's not that reasonable anymore, right? So what happened back in the 1930s, and we talk about this, it's actually very famous in Bitcoin, Executive Order 6102. And essentially, it was an executive order signed by President FDR during the Great Recession and essentially made it illegal for American citizens to hold gold. You know how crazy that sounds, right? You as an American citizen are not allowed to own a certain type of metal that occurs naturally on planet Earth because the government needs to stay afloat. That sounds insane to me. Anyways, so these are a couple examples of people that fought back against the executive order, and you'll start to notice patterns of why was this government so successful at seizing that naturally occurring metal. All right, anyways, let's check it out. Numerous individuals and companies were prosecuted related to FDR's executive order 6102. The prosecutions took place under the subsequent executive orders 6111, 620, 6261, and the Gold Reserve Act of 1934. The circumstances of the case were that New York Attorney General Frederick Barber Campbell had one deposit at Chase National Bank. Ah, there it is again, right? Very similar to what you're hearing with the case of Venezuela, very similar to what you're hearing with Austria, but this is just happening on an individual level, right? On the individual level and on the country level, the same problem happens. You're trusting someone else to custody your wealth, right? When Campbell attempted to withdraw the gold, remember guys, not your keys, not your Bitcoin, Chase refused and Campbell sued Chase. Doesn't matter. A federal prosecutor then indicted Campbell on the following day for failing to surrender his gold. So he didn't even have custody of it anymore, but because he didn't go along, they still prosecuted the guy for holding a naturally occurring metal. Insanity. Ultimately, the prosecution of Campbell failed, but the authority of the federal government to seize the gold was upheld, and Campbell's gold was confiscated. Confiscated is another word for stolen. A few months later, Congress passed the Gold Reserve Act of 1934, which ratified Roosevelt's orders. A new set of Treasury regulations was issued, providing civil penalties of confiscation, stealing of all gold, and imposition of fines equal to double the value of the gold seized. So not only are they going to take it, they're going to fine you for the gold. Crazy stuff. So this is another example. Foreigners also had gold confiscated and were forced to accept paper money for their gold. Ah, that's the signal. I can't even pronounce that. A Swiss banking company had 1,250,000 in gold coins for business use. The Swiss company entrusted the gold to an American firm for safekeeping. Outsourcing what? Custody. Okay, so why am I talking about all of this stuff? Okay, trying to make the case that Bitcoin is superior to all of this, because if enough people take self-custody, okay, it's very different if the US government or any government for that matter says Bitcoin's illegal. But if people actually have it in self-custody, remember, Bitcoin is a monetary network, so you don't have to use their rails. I could transact with Phil directly. Who's gonna know? And let's talk about custody, for example, just something that we advocate for. Push comes to shove, you can and will memorize 12 words. So what are they gonna do? How are they gonna pry those 12 words out of your mind, which gives you access to your Bitcoin? How are they gonna do that? Not to mention all the functionalities that the new cold card has, which we had NVK on. You could just, show an alternative wallet, brick the device. It's like, this is what I'm talking about. Bitcoin moves the balance of power from the state to the the individual. Because of that, it's completely superior to gold. We don't know how much gold is in the ground. We have no idea. No idea. But we know that there's 21 million Bitcoin for a fact. So not only is Bitcoin easier to transport over long distances, it gives you an edge in terms of custody. It actually benefits you more to self-custody than it is outsourcing that responsibility to a bank, which could be easily captured by a government. It moves the power into your hands. This is why it's better. And the current market cap of gold is $9-10 trillion. This is superior to that. Much superior. It's much more scarce. It's much easier to transport. It's much easier to custody. You could it's a monetary system, which Jack Mallers has shown. You don't even have to use Bitcoin itself. You could just use the network. It's superior in every single way. But the thing is worth 9 to 10 times less than gold. The writing is on the frickin' wall. It really is. Just people haven't awoken up to this. But so far, in its 12 years of existence, Bitcoin has been made legal tender in 2 countries, I would say 3, including Panama. It has been the best appreciated asset in human history, right? It has given the people of Tonga, people in Afghanistan, the Cubans, which we've also covered, access to the financial system. It's the most inclusive money that has ever existed, but it's worth 9 times less than the thing that it's supposedly competing for. I don't know. Look, I'm a fan of physical gold. I like it because it's sound, right? You know that someone just can't print more of it at no cost, but it's very limited into what you could do with it. What are you going to do with that metal bar? How are you going to sell it? How are you going to exchange? You go to McDonald's, right? Are you going to chip off and weigh the exact piece of gold so that you could pay for your fries? Bitcoin has 8 decimal places. You could get a fraction of Bitcoin to pay for your fries. So I'm making the case right now that Bitcoin is superior in every single way. And that's why I fundamentally believe when people find out, when the world finds out, and they are slowly but surely, this will push Bitcoin into the hundreds of thousands, if not millions, if not tens of millions. Easily. It's just a better technology. It does everything that gold does, but it's better. The only thing that gold has an advantage on Bitcoin is that it has a 2,000, 3,000, 5,000 year history. That's the only thing. But that time will fix that also, right? So those are my thoughts. Those are my 2 cents. I hope I made the case.